Hello everyone, my name is Ritika Rupa. So today I will be covering a session on the very famous topic that is being very talked about among the developers, that is front end versus back end versus database. So let's get into it. That what exactly is the front end, what exactly is the back end, and what is exactly a database. So the overview of this session is that we will be able to know that what are the fundamental building blocks of the modern application, and by the end of this session we will be able to clearly understand the role of front end, back end versus database, and how they communicate between each others and the end to end request and response flow. We will be also able to visualize how real world application works. So first, moving on to the technicalities of this front end, back end, and what database exactly is, let us take a simple example of a real world life. So, imagine a restaurant. So, when you go to a restaurant, what do you see? You see the menu, you see the waiters that are delivering the food and taking orders from the customers. You also see how is food prepared in the kitchen and the area or the store where the food is getting stored. So now map this exact things in the world of software. So the restaurant that you see, the chairs, tables, everything that you see whole together comes under the category of web application. What is the menu and the table that you are seeing? That is the front end of the application. And the waiter that is taking the orders, delivering the orders, what is that? This is the back end. And the kitchen where the food is prepared using some predefined logic, that is the back end logic, where it helps to calculate and process the data and delivers it to the user. And what is the storeroom? Storeroom is the exact place where the data is stored. In the software development, it is called the database. So let's dig into one by one in detail. So what is front end? So front end is the part of the application that users see and interact with. For example, the login page that you see, the sign up forms, the buttons, images, dashboard while scrolling a site like Amazon, the products that you are seeing, this is all a part of the front end. What are the technologies used while designing this part? So the most common technologies and the most famous ones are HTML, that is designing the structure of the web page, which is also called the hypertext markup language. For the styling purpose, for example, the button that you see in the blue color is designed by the CSS, which is called as cascading style sheets. The JavaScript executes the logic, the backend logic, and the interactivity with the database. And the frameworks that is used can be categorized into different types, which is Angular and Vue. So many people may confuse that what is React? Is it a framework or a library? So React is a library. It is not a framework. Moving on, let's take another example to understand this clearly. So, imagine you are using a banking application. So, what do you see in the banking application? So, first for login, you enter the account number, you enter the password, and then click on the login button. So, the login button, the password entering box, the username entering box, all this is a part of the front end. But does front end verify your password? No, it doesn't. Front end only takes the input, displays the output, sends data back to the backend, and that's it. Rest all other validations and processing is done by the backend. So the front end does not store sensitive data. It does not directly talks to the database and does not process any logic at all. So what exactly is a backend? Is this the brain of the computer? No, it is the brain of the application. For example, we make decisions of our own by the help of the brain. In the similar way, backend is the brain of the application that processes the logic and delivers it to the users. It receives the request from the front end and talks to the database on the any validation that needs to be done and sends the response back. So, what are the most famous backend technologies that is being used in nowadays? So, the most common and the famous ones are Node.js, which is basically a Java runtime environment that helps the user to run JavaScript code outside of the browser. Java is also used, which on which the Spring Boot runs. So, Spring Boot is a framework written in Java. Similarly, Django is also a framework that is written in Python language. And what is PHP? PHP is basically server-side scripting, which is also most famous backend technologies used nowadays. And .NET is also a most famous technology which is open source and cross platform developer, so that they can develop and publish the websites and mobile applications also. So what does backend exactly do? So here is a flow. So when you click on the login button in the application that you were using, so what does backend do? It receives the username and a password from the front end, checks if the user exists with interacting with the database, and then compares the stored password with the encrypted one that is stored in the DB. And if it is matching, then it generates the login session, and if it is not, then sends the error message. So basically, backend makes all the decisions and not anything else. So, what is a database? Let's get into it in detail. So, database is where data is permanently stored. It is not a type of storage where we can store temporary data. Data is stored permanently. It can store various type of data, for example, user details, password in the encrypted format, and transaction history, product details, order details, any type of messages that you may want to store. So here in the picture, you can see the database is talking to the application as well as the user with the help of the APIs. So what does exactly a API is? So basically, API is a protocol that is used to interact with the source and destination in some having some rules and regulations. So for example, it can work on any type of protocols. For example, there are multiple protocols, TCP IP protocol is there, and many more. So let's look at the database types. So the most common ones are listed on the left hand side. So the first one is MySQL. It is basically a relational database. Then the next one comes as PostgreSQL, then MongoDB, Oracle SQL, and vector database is also present in today's market. So MongoDB database stores data in the form of key value pairs, primarily known as in the JSON format. Oracle database is also a database which are having multiple versions. So you can store any type of data. For example, nowadays Oracle has launched a 23ai.com database which stores the vector embeddings of the AI models that is being recently used in many developers. So, another real life example, yes. So, let's get into the bank system. So, what in banking, what does database source? Database does not store the UI that is being showed, the process logic, or the decisions. It only stores the data, retrieves the data, updates the data in the database, and delete the data. There is a very basic example in the box in the of the slide. So, for example, the user ID of my name is 101. My balance is 50,000, and the password is any hashed password. So, in this way, database stores the data of a person who are having an account in the bank. So, how do they communicate between each other? So, the front end and the back end communicates using HTTP request, which is hypertext transfer protocols. There are multiple type of HTTP request. For example, GET request, POST request, PUT request, and DELETE request. So, GET request usually is used when we want to retrieve some data from the database, and when POST request is used when we want to insert some data. Similarly, delete is used for deleting the data. And what does the format of the data is? That is the JSON format. I already told you, right? The JSON format is in the name of key and values. So on the right hand side, you can see the name is the key and Ritika is the value of that particular key. Frontend sends the request to the backend. The backend processes them and interacts with the database, and response travel back from the database to the backend to the frontend that the users see on the application. This is the architecture overview. So I told you, right? User to the front end, to the back end, to the database, and again to the database, to the back end, to the front end, and then to the user. And this cycle keeps on repeating. And this is a very simple example of a restaurant that is I already introduced in the beginning. So, why do we separate the backend, front end, and the database in different parts? So, the separation is very much important because it makes the application secure, scalable, and easier to maintain. It increases the security, it increases the scalability and maintainability of the application. So, if the database was exposed, anyone can do anything in the database. He or she can remove the data. That is not allowed, and that is a not good practice in the today's modern world. Similarly, scalability. We can increase the backend server. If these three were all bundled up together, then we cannot do that in that case. And maintainability comes under when the front end developers work separately. So how do they integrate into the one? Then they can use different branches, push the code into them, and then combine it in a very single web application that can be easily deployed on the production environment. So what happens in if one of the part fails? For example, if the database crashes, what happens? Login will fail, if you ordering a food will fail, everything breaks. So that is why it is very important to separate one of the other parts in different sections. Real industry example. So many of us are using many social media sites, right? So let's consider when you use Instagram, WhatsApp, or any banking application, any e-commerce application like Amazon, they have multiple front-end servers. They are microservices backend, distributed database and caching layers, and there are load balancers that is taking up the load while having a sale or something like that where the traffic increases. But the concept remains the same. The data flows from the front end to the back end to the database and back and forth. So, the key people involved in developing a web application are usually called front end developers, back end developers, and the database administrator, which is usually called DBA. So, what does a front end developer do? So, he or she builds the UI of the application. The buttons, the colors, the styles that you see on the application is all done by a front end developer. What does a backend developer do? He writes the logic of the application. He also handles the APIs and the connectivity of the networking that the front end and the backend can connect together. And what does a database administrator do? It designs the database, maintains data security, and optimizes for the performance so that there will be faster updation, deletion, and retrieval of the data from the database. So here we comes at the end of our session, having a conclusion on these three topics, which is very famous among developers. So I hope that you might have enjoyed the session and also have a clear understanding of what is a front end, back end, and a database is actually works on a web application. And with this, I end my session, having you all the best for your future sessions. Thank you.